Hello and welcome to the garden. Well, it's a lovely day here today, but we are forecast rain tomorrow and we'll probably get a bit of rain now for the next 3 or 4 days. Now I've got some shallots that are more or less ready to lift, and I don't think they will appreciate a prolonged soaking at this stage. So I want to lift those today while they're nice and dry. Now I've got 2 sorts of shallots in the garden, in fact 2 different species of shallot, and one of those still has, I think, a couple of weeks to go, and the other one is right ready. So what I thought I'd do first is show you the more common sort of shallot and see how they're doing. So this is Longue du Bretagne, and this forms a good sized elongated bulb. Now both sorts of shallots were planted in the autumn, and I was really impressed with the sets that I got for these. I bought them from Seeds of Italy, and they were some of the best quality shallot bulbs I've bought for planting. They were pretty uniform, a good size, they were all sound. Yeah, really nice shallots. And some of these have produced some really great bulbs. This one here, for example, is a really good size, and that's partly because the bulbs haven't split into too many offsets. I think 4 or 5 is quite common in this planting, sometimes 3, and when they don't split into too many, you tend to get quite good sized bulbs from them. Here's one that's split into 4. Again, I've got 4 good sized bulbs coming there. Now most of this foliage is still good and green. There's no need for me to lift these yet. I mean, I could lift them, they're a good size, but they will continue to develop a little bit, I think, for another couple of weeks. When this foliage is yellowing and flopping over, then I'll look for a few days of dry weather before lifting them. So that sort of shallot is the same species as the onion. It's a different group. It is still a proper shallot in that it was propagated from a bulb, not seed. There are, though, some that are called shallots that are started from seed, and that's kind of a matter of debate as to whether those can be properly referred to as shallots. Some maintain that shallots are only the sort that are propagated vegetatively, and well, personally I think there is some merit to that point of view. But anyway, that is a proper shallot in the sense that it was grown from bulbs. The other one I have here is the Grey Shallot, and that one's actually a different species altogether. So that one is really old, and you can never grow it from seed. It will not flower, and you can only propagate it by planting bulbs. It's not that common, I think. You might occasionally find it in a greengrocer's, but it not often, and I've never seen it in a supermarket. It is highly prized by chefs, and the flavour is great. I picked one of the smaller bulbs yesterday, and my wife and I were just munching on it to see how they had done, and it has a really great flavour. So if you've never grown them before, it's certainly worth having a go just to see what you think of the taste of them. I like them. They don't grow perhaps quite as neatly as the other sorts of shallots. It's very scrappy, and it has the tendency to throw up a great many offsets, and as a consequence many of them are rather small. And in fact, the bulbs I got to plant were a real mixed bag. There are some whoppers in there and a great many small bulbs. In fact, the smaller bulbs can be the better ones to plant, because the larger the bulb, the more likely it is to develop a multitude of offsets, and then you just end up with lots and lots of small bulbs. And in fact, I planted the larger ones in one patch and the smaller ones in another, and some of the smaller bulbs are actually still growing okay. I am going to lift them all today because we've got that bad weather coming, but if it weren't for that, they would still go on for another week or so, I think. So here is the Grey Shallot, and very few of these bulbs will achieve the sort of size of the other type, but I mean, this is a pretty good sized bulb for the Grey Shallot. That one's not bad. And then we've got some tiddlers in there. I think that's the case with most of these. We've got maybe a couple of good sized bulbs in each clump and then some very small ones. But you can see that this patch has definitely gone over. A lot of this top growth is now quite dry. There are a few that still have some green, but really not very much. And this was the planting with the larger bulbs. The very largest bulbs went down the center of the bed, and you can see there's just a ridiculous number of bulbs here. I mean, there must be at least 3 dozen in this cluster. It looks like I've got at least one that's of a decent size. I mean, all of these are usable, it's just that they're rather small. But these bulbs here would be very good for planting in the autumn. So I think I might reserve some of these smaller ones for just that purpose. In the other patch where I planted the smaller bulbs, you can see that there's a lot more green foliage here, and as I say, these could probably go on for another week or so if it weren't for the wet weather. Some of them are starting to flop over, and I don't think it makes sense to leave them any longer. There's a funny situation in here, I think, because these small bulbs, they divide into far fewer offsets. There's only 6 on this particular plant. But I think the very smallest bulbs, this would have been one of them, they don't really produce big bulbs either, because I mean, that's a good sized bulb, but I think they tend to be rather weak. The growth on some of these is pretty poor. At this end of the bed, we had those that were of a sort of intermediate size. And I think these are much better. I think when I lift this is going to be a good sized bulb here. And these stems are much more robust. So that's the ideal thing to plant, I think. A bulb of modest size, not the really big ones, they split into too many offsets, and not the really tiny ones because they just produce rather weak plants. So as always, I'm not just going to yank these, I'm going to get the trowel underneath and try to lift them out. They've certainly got plenty of root on them. There we go. I'm not going to do too much to these, I just want to knock off the worst of the soil. It's a little bit claggy. We did have some rain a few days ago, and it would have been nicer if we'd had another couple of days of dry weather. But I can split those up later. Oh, that's falling apart there, that'll be all right. Okay. So I've got some reasonable sized bulbs in this collection. I mean, for Grey Shallots, that's not bad. These are a good size for the kitchen, and they're rock solid. They all seem pretty sound, so that is fantastic. I've got plenty here, so I don't need to worry about those tiny ones. And it is worth factoring that in when thinking about planting this sort, because those small bulbs, I think, are pretty much inevitable. They've got great roots on them. Yeah, there's some smaller bulbs in there. We've got a mixed size here. That's not bad. I think if these were ordinary shallots, I would be rather disappointed, but this is, I think, more or less what to expect for the grey shallot, and that's a lovely specimen in the middle there, rock solid. I've been quite careful not to actually hit the bulb, that wouldn't do them any favours. Now these really tiny ones here, I'm not going to bother with. They are far too small. I will discard those. This is a sort of size that's pretty good for replanting, and that's ideal for the kitchen. So I've got a real mixed bag there. Those are absolutely superb. If they were all like that, I would be absolutely thrilled, but I don't think they ever will be, not with the grey shallot. I'm in the other bed now, and I'll be interested to see what these smaller bulbs manage to produce. Wow. Actually, I would be happy. I think I'd be more happy to get just that from one bulb than all of those silly little things that I've got to faff around with. That's rather nice. I'm going to try and keep some of these bulbs for replanting, and that way I can pick exactly the sizes that I want. Yeah, that's much nicer. Oh, they've got ridiculous roots on them. Well, that's the shallots gathered in, and I've just got them stacked in the greenhouse here. I've got a couple of shelves there that are covered in them, and they will dry fairly well up there. And then on the side I've got a couple of those crates that are full. Now I don't want to pile them too high in there, otherwise they won't dry out very well, but there are vents on the sides of these trays, and hopefully we'll get some reasonable airflow through there. And after the coming wet spell is gone, hopefully I'll be able to spread these out somewhere to dry even better. Now I've mentioned this on previous videos that I'd put in far too many alliums of all sorts, but particularly the shallots. Completely crazy. I have no idea what I was thinking about. I've got an even larger area of the ordinary shallots to come yet. So yeah, I mean, we will get through a lot of these because I prefer these even to onions for most jobs. But of course I've got a lot of onions to come as well. Next year I'm planning to be a little bit more sensible, and I'll probably set out around about a third of this quantity, and I think that will be more than enough. Having lifted all of those, I can see that the harvest is actually maybe a little bit better than I was thinking at the beginning. So there are lots of small bulbs, but I've got so many that I can discard those that are just too fiddly to mess around with. But I do have plenty of really quite good sized bulbs, so I mean these are going to be perfect in the kitchen. These are excellent for general culinary purposes, and I mean we've got a huge quantity of really good sized bulbs. No massive ones, but I think that's probably what you'd expect for a good sized grey shallot. I don't think they get too much larger than that. I think the other sort can can produce larger bulbs, and they are much more consistent. This provides such a wide mix of sizes. But I'm pretty happy with those, and once they're nice and dry, I'll go through them and I'll grade them, and I'll discard the tiniest ones. I'll put the largest ones aside for use in the kitchen, and well, I might string some of those up, and then I will put some aside that I think might be a good size for planting in the autumn. Well, it's absolutely baking here in the garden today, so I'm going to go and get out of the sun. So that is all for this video. Thanks ever so much for watching, and bye for now.